Whoop. Did you hear that as well? Was that just me?
No, we all heard that.
That's must be a new feature they got. Okay, well, look, welcome everybody. There's a bunch of folks that are still joining, so we'll just give everybody a minute or two to join, and we'll do some introductions.
I've got a builder outside my window at the moment. We're having house painted, and this ladder's just appeared. It's really off-putting.
Oh, it's terrible. I was doing a presentation for another event a couple of weeks ago. We're having a patio laid at home at the time, and literally just as I was about to start speaking, a man knocked at the door, and then a forklift truck came along, started moving around and dropping all the slabs next to the window. It was, you couldn't have made it up. It was awful. You know, there you go. All right, look, we'll crack on, guys. We've got a good amount of folks live now. So look, welcome everybody, and thank you again for your support and joining the ICCM PlotBox webinars. It's much appreciated. We've got another fantastic speaker for you today with a very interesting topic, and it's going to Simon Holden. I'll let Simon Holden introduce himself in more detail, but many, of course, everybody know him as CEO of the Fanos Group, and of course Julie here from the ICCM as well, taking all your questions and all this discussion on everything that Simon's going to walk us through. So, Simon, if you just want to say a quick hello to everybody and make some introductions.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Simon. I'm a member of the Fanos Group. We currently operate two companies within the funeral sector, Natural Transitions and the Woodland Burial Company. I'm here today to talk about the work we do with Natural Transitions and our partners VPI, and it's all about the precision organic dispersal system.
Very good. All right, thank you very much. And we'll get going on it in just a second. So just as is normal, folks, the interactivity is the name of the game. So let us know your comments as Simon's speaking. Send in your questions, whether that be in the chat or the Q&A tool. We'd love to have your feedback, your thoughts and opinions. And at the end of this, there'll be ample time for you to get questions through to Simon. So if it's a topic that's intriguing you, if there's anything, stuff you want to know, things you've often wondered about, now's the time. So get that fed through, and we'll make sure you guys leave with the answers that you're looking for. Okay, well look, we'll crack on. Simon, we'll pass over to you, good self.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Neil. So firstly, thanks Julie for asking me along to chat today. Much appreciated. And as I said, I'm from the Fanos Group. We're here to talk about the work we do with Natural Transitions and our American partners VPI. I think the first logical thing to do would be to introduce you to our research team. They consist of Professor Carter, who's a forensic taphonomist, easy for me to say, Professor Tibbett, who again is a forensic taphonomist, Dr. Haskell, who's a forensic entomologist, Dr. Scoff, who's a forensic anthropologist, and Dr. Yokoski, who's a plant, soil and growth specialist, are the key players in what I'm going to talk about today, and they've been heading up our research team for the last number of years. Since 2017, we've been working on developing our pod system, which is POD, Precision Organic Dispersal System, which we believe is a genuine, sustainable alternative to burial and cremation. So before explaining what the pod is and how it works, I think it's as important to understand how we got here, because with all good science, its research results and data have been the bedrock of its development. We didn't set out to intentionally develop a pod system. It's just where over the years, over the decade, the research and development has led us down that path. So we're not trying to shoehorn science to fit our narrative. The narrative has presented the solution. So it all started in 2009 with the lovely Bob and Annette Jenkins, who are the founders of VPI. Bob was 40 years in the funeral home and cemetery management industry, and Annette is a pharmacist. Increasingly throughout Bob's career, he noticed that the older crematoriums and cemeteries were struggling to maintain their aesthetic standards, the gardens, the grounds, and this got him thinking. He started to investigate that, being the chap that he is, and himself and Annette. Fast forward a number of years, and Bob and Annette had started to put together effectively what is the equivalent to the Harlem Globetrotters of the forensic science world, as aforementioned. And they put that together under a company banner named VPI, Verde Products Inc., Green Products Inc. Annette being Italian heritage, Verde was the green, Italian for green. But anyway, and they began the research and study. And the first study they did was the impact of earth burial on the breakdown and dispersal of bodies and cremated remains. So at that point, it was nothing to do with a pod system. I'll talk about the cremated remains later on, and for now, we'll just focus on the body dispersal element. So the burial study involved numerous monitored and probed burials of pigs. And it's important to say that all the pigs were very poorly before they were euthanized and buried. And the study basically buried at very different depths, and then studied the different conditions that the burials took place at. This yielded results and data that showed that the different depth of a burial has very dramatic effects on the data that we received, and also the efficiency of the decomposition at that depth. This was investigated by the team. Excuse me. This was investigated by the team through more burials, more testing, more data, and it became apparent that after analysing the soil samples at those depths, that the microbial cultures were the main factor in the different results that we found at different depths. Different depths, different cultures. The deeper the depth the sample was taken from, the more sparse the cultures were. Very simple reason for that. All of your main players in decomposition are aerobic. Not very many things in nature. Mother Nature hasn't developed a method of decomposing effectively underground, because basically it just doesn't happen very often, and so therefore it's a very specialized bunch of activators that you would need to do that for you at that depth. The investigation team, the next phase was to identify and isolate which of those activators, so the microbial cultures, they consist of bacteria, enzymes, microorganisms, and a couple of fungi, and it is to understand their individual function of each one of those activators, along with their symbiotic relationship with the other activators and their combined role in effective decomposition. So once we understood this, we then set about learning how to culture these individual little fellas, these activators. Now obviously I've just said that in a few sentences, but that's a good number of years worth of research right there that Bob and Annette and the team led. It was this study that led to the creation of RTN. It stands for Return to Nature. RTN is a soil medium with the microbial cultures calibrated to optimum levels with those identified activators. It's effectively a supercharged decomposition agent. It looks just like an incredibly fine soil. The soil is more like the vehicle that contains the cultures. All of the cultures, all of the activators, they're all found naturally, so that none of them are engineered. They are naturally occurring cultures that we have just increased the number of count in that sample, if you like. So during this study, it became apparent that there were very different and definite stages of decomposition. And through later study and further research, we began to understand and master exactly which activators were working at each stage of that decomposition. So you start off with your soft tissue, so stripping the soft tissues, the organs and everything else. That is the incredibly easy bit. That is not difficult at all. Obviously, it becomes far more complicated when you start dealing with the keratin, the connective tissues, the tough cartilaginous tissues that we have, the bones, obviously, things like that. That's where it becomes a little bit more difficult and a little bit more complicated. So the accumulation of this study, the ground burial study, was that we were consistently, and also the development of the RTN, we were consistently able to achieve full body dispersals in around 3 years, which that was and still very much is groundbreaking. Anyone who works in crematory or indeed cemeteries will know that you can still have very much lingering remnants of folks hundreds of years after burial, let alone within 3 years. So that was quite groundbreaking. But being a science-led operation, and certainly with the certain type of minds that are involved, the logical next step was to investigate the prohibitors. So we could do it in 3 years, but why couldn't we do it in 2 years? What was the reasons for this? What stopped us quickening that up? The answer was really quite obvious when we got down to it. It's the ground conditions, the atmospheric conditions present in an earth burial, or to be precise, the lack of control over those atmospheric conditions. So now we understood the atmospheric and environmental range that our activators like to work at, we realized quite quickly that you can't manage those factors in a ground burial. It's just impossible to manage the atmospheric and ground conditions. So we started to look at environmental and atmospheric controls, and at this point it was blatantly obvious that we couldn't do this in the ground. So we took it above ground so we could study it, and that's where the concept for the pod was born and conceived, through bringing the research that we've been doing in the ground above ground, purely to see what environmental factors were acting in the ground. And then it was a eureka moment of, well, hang on, look at what we're doing. So before I explain the pod, what it does and how it does it in more detail, it's probably a little bit dull for you guys because you probably heard it every other day, but it's why do we need a cremation alternative and burial alternative. So as we all know, cremation is by far and away, without doubt, the most common method of body dispersal in the UK. I'm sure that everyone's well aware of the issues that are connected with it as well, which is it creates large amounts of various emissions. You get CO2, your nitrates, your fine air particulates, your mercury, etc., etc. The whole system, the whole process has a huge reliance on fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, and the natural gas and oil are in the process of being phased out in industry, across industry. It's not just the funeral sector that's being picked on. This is across, well, cars going electric, etc. If the gas and the fossil fuels and oil is being reduced, then obviously there is a definite need for something to take over the pressure of the dispersals, or the number of dispersals we have in the UK. On top of that, there's also the issue with the ashes themselves. And anyone who's heard us speak before, or we've chatted to before, be well aware of our thoughts on this. So the ashes at the end of the process are by definition toxic, which is becoming more and more common to the people know this. But indeed, yeah, the ashes are toxic. They have a pH of 11.8, which is insanely high, and they have a sodium reading which is up to 2,000 times the saline tolerance of any plant found in the UK, which obviously is alarm bells ringing right there. Cremation in England and Wales creates 1,100 tons on average of ashes per year. These are handed back to the public for unregulated dispersal. And to put that into context, that is enough ashes to cover and sterilise an area of land the size of 385 football pitches per year, every single year. Now, you can imagine if any new industry wanted to dispose of their toxic byproduct by handing it out in 3.5 kilo there or thereabouts packages and saying, please just go and spread wherever you feel, it just simply wouldn't be allowed. But obviously cremation, having the subject matter that it covers and also the amount of time that it's been in play, it's just one of those things that has slipped through the net. But ashes are incredibly bad once they're introduced to the ground. Obviously, I can hear it now. Like, what about electric cremators? A fabulous step, a step in the right direction, but you still have the same holes as you have with fossil fuel cremation as you have with electric cremation. Yes, electric cremators will reduce the amount of CO2 by a maximum of 50%, so they'll halve it. The mercury escape is still mercury escape. Another issue, electric cremation is much, much slower. I had a conversation with someone last week who actually witnessed an electric cremation that took nearly 5 hours to complete, with all the issues of not being able to flare and all the other things that you guys will understand far greater than I. With current cremation figures, obviously, if you start tripling the time, even of just 20% of the cremations, the numbers still don't work with the number of crematorium and the number of processes that need to happen every year. So that's a bit of an issue. And then just the actual practical and physical element of it. The electric cremators are quite a lot bigger. Existing crematoria that have three cremators in there, 1 to be cleaned, 2 to be operational, and so you've got that facility. How do they fit these larger cremators into an existing space while still operational and still processing the numbers that they have to process? It becomes an incredibly difficult and logistical challenge. And quite frankly, I think the only way it can be got around is by additional building and additional. So it's a compounding problem. It doesn't really sort itself out. And then after that, you've still got the issue of the ashes after it. You've still got the negative secondary output. And while I'm on the subject of electric crematories, and just off on a tangent really, plug it in can't be the environmental answer for everything, which seems to be the way that the government is. Oh, just plug it in, go electric, that'll sort it out. Basically, the grid simply can't handle the load as it is at the moment, let alone if we start having every single electric car. An electric cremation uses the same amount of energy as your average person does in 30 days, 500,000 cremations a year. That's a heck of a lot more energy that the grid needs to carry and produce. The green energy, we just don't produce enough of it. And unfortunately, when there is a shortfall, that's made up by the burning of fossil fuel generators, basically. So the fossil fuel generators will be subsidising the system for green energy, which just seems insane to me. Hinkley Point power station that was due to, well, it's now scheduled to open 2026 is what they're saying. That was commissioned in 2010, along with 7 other power stations. As it stands, Hinkley Point is the only one that's under development. The other 7 still don't really even have a site to be built on. And obviously looking at the 16 years it's predicted to take Hinkley Point to become operational, there's going to be this huge hole in green energy production, or indeed a greener solution if the green energy can't subsidise the grid or run the grid. So there's an issue with plug it in. That will sort everything out that we've seen. And I've had that from a chap who works with the grid who has asked to remain nameless for this conversation. Yeah, like I say, you still have your secondary negative output of your ashes to dispose of. Burial carries its own ground pollution issues, which all the ground pollution issues are caused by poor decomposition. As I've already said, the lower you go, the deeper you go, the less of the activators, the cultures, the microbial cultures you need to disperse and degrade and decompose the body. They just aren't there. So you have poor decomposition. This leads to all of your anaerobic bacteria working, producing what you associate with burial and death: bad smells, nasty leachate, adipocere effect, all these things. They're all a result of poor decomposition. Good decomposition, effective decomposition, doesn't produce the smell, doesn't produce the leachate, doesn't produce, because the decomposition, it will use itself. So with that, 75% of local authorities have declared a climate emergency, which became apparent to us that there was an increasing need for a sustainable positive impact alternative for body dispersal, to give the public an option, to give them a green choice. So in 2017, we got to work after we'd realised what we'd done by removing the burial above ground and controlling the atmospheric conditions. We put all of our resources, time and focus into the development of the pod system. Developing a pod or body dispersal, or a new body dispersal system from scratch, presented us with a fantastic opportunity to address the negative impact elements of current dispersal methods. And so straight from the outset, could we make it carbon neutral or even negative? Eliminate all the additional emissions that are produced? Could we capture and store and even recycle or safely dispose of the mercury and eliminate all mercury escape? We wanted to make sure it was minimal energy usage, and even could we operate it off grid by generating our own energy on site. We needed it, or wanted it, to be a full cycle system, so no secondary negative output, no need to then take the bones of the deceased, cremulate them, for want of a better word, and turn them into dust, and then for those then to be passed on as a secondary negative. The system needed to be capable of dealing with the numbers. To do a system where this is brilliant, we can do 2 people a month per local authority, doesn't really add up. We needed to make sure that we could hit the numbers and basically match cremation. So if the system was as popular as it potentially could be with the public, then could we do the numbers? That was an essential part of it. And then finally, it was especially important to ensure it was affordable, and not just for the public, for the end user, for the families, but also for the owner operators to implement the system. So a system that cost or took 10 years to pay for itself wasn't really acceptable, because no one's going to walk away from a crematorium that they're already operating for X amount of profit per year to then sink themselves into something they're not going to see any money for 10 years. So that was quite an important factor with us, that we kept it affordable for everyone concerned. So If you jump forward from 2017 and to now, we're about to commence our third and final R&D phase with a market-ready product in around 18 months. The third phase of R&D will be carried out in the prototype of the production-ready pod. This will be carried out in conjunction with Reading University Forensic Science Department and will be headed up by Professor Tibbett and team. Part of the R&D, it's important that the more data sets we get, the more accurate we can control the process. So it's not about proving we can do it once, twice. We need to have data sets running for hundreds and hundreds of times, so then we can find our tolerances and our mediums. As I said at the beginning of the talk, it's important to understand how we got to this point and the function of the RTN in the process. So it understands it's not just the pod, it's what the pod is filled with, the RTN, the cultures, the microbial culture, that's essential. So straw and alfalfa just won't cut the mustard. You know, your soft tissues will disappear quite quickly, as they would in a wheelie bin. But as soon as you start dealing with your hard connective materials, that's when the process will cease there, and that's where we basically kick into gear and what the research has all been about. So now that we have the atmosphere, we've learned to control the atmospheric environment. We can provide the optimum conditions for the activators at the time they are needed at that stage of decomposition. So, for example, there are certain guys, I call them the little guys, certain activators that really go to town on calcium. So we need to make sure that they're present for when the bone is happening. There's obviously the ones that your fatty amino acids, your body, your soft tissues. There's the activators for that. There's your keratin, your teeth, your hair, things like this. They're really tough stuff to get rid of. So at each stage, we'll know where they are being acted upon, and then we can optimize the conditions for that process of the decomposition to make sure that the activators have everything they need to do what they can in the numbers that they need in order to, you know, push the decomposition through in the time scale that we need. So how do we know that what stage of the decomposition the pod is at? It would be the, you know, how do we know what's happening in there? And this is where it gets really quite clever and a little bit above my head, if I'm honest. Each of the activators has its own unique signature. So the pod monitors these signatures, understands what they mean, understands which activator is producing them, and this tells us what stage of decomposition the body is at that point. So that enables us to then optimize to that stage. All of this is operated, and the pod then makes adjustments as it needs to. So if things start falling out of sync, if things aren't working right and it's not following the correct path, the pod will then alter itself and amend itself to make sure it brings it back in. All of this is obviously monitored, and so we know that that's happening. This is all controlled by an algorithm, a control algorithm, and the more, like I say, the more data we put into this algorithm now, the better the outcome will be and the quicker the system will learn. So it's essential that we run multiple tests, hundreds of tests in the pods before it's market ready, and that's the next stage of what we're doing. So by understanding the activators, or which of the activators are operating at what stage of the dispersal, the decomposition, and what part of that decomposition they are required, we can accurately control and predict. We can control the system, control the decomposition, and also know when it's finished, which is the important part. So at no point from the body entering the pod until when the pod's finished do we interact with that system. So in plain English, what does this all mean? We can achieve full cycle dispersal, all soft tissue, bone, hair, teeth, nails, cartilaginous tissues and materials in 12 weeks. So from full body to nothing, no DNA, nothing, no trace in 12 weeks. All that this leaves is a highly accessible and usable nutrient form of soil, and that's ready to be used by the family in the traditional interment, scattering, or as we would recommend, a tree memorial, a living tree memorial. The process for the body is respectful and simple. It's very important for us that it's not just efficient, but it's also respectful. We think that's as important for our own ethics as it is for it to be accepted by the public. And again, when we entered into this, I'd never seen a cremation. My thoughts on what cremation was, I think exactly like General Joe Public's thoughts on what cremation is. Having witnessed a few of them, I can safely say that it is far, far more gentler and less violence is subjected to the body than through a standard cremation. So it's a very respectful system. How it works, the pod, which is it's got a special blend of RTN that goes in there because we want to make sure the keratin, which is the most difficult of all of the elements that we are degrading, if you will, incredibly tough proteins. We need to make sure that that these are dealt with correctly. So the pod is half filled with the RTN. The cadaver is placed upon, is wrapped in a shroud, is placed upon the top. The pod is then filled to the appropriate level, sealed and plugged into the system. The system then takes over, operates that pod, and will tell us, as and when the system's finished. The pod centers. So where are these centers? Where are these housed? Well, we've made it so, or designed it so they're scalable. Just like a crematorium, if you're in the middle of London, you obviously need to process far more than if you're in rural Wales. So it's completely scalable. And just like a crematorium, we will build them to the required size of that local authority's needs. The other thing is they can be scaled up as well. So once the pod centre is in place, it's not a great stretch to increase it. So if a centre needed to double its output, then we can quite easily manage that. Where am I? So each pod, the actual physical pod itself, it's made from at least 10% recycled materials, and my colleague Leo is looking into with the manufacturers if we can increase the level of recycled materials that we use in the production. It's all about the integral structure, integrity, the structural integrity of the pod, and too much recycled material will actually weaken that, and so we just need to find that balance. But at the moment, we're working about 10%. So even the pod itself will have a 10% recycled component to it. The life expectancy of each pod is about 40 years, so you get plenty of use out of them. So each pod's obviously reusable. It's not the pod doesn't degrade. The pod is just emptied, refilled, emptied, refilled. And like I say, you'll get about 40 years good operation out of each pod. And to best describe how they look like, or what they look like, if anyone's a sci-fi fan like I am, I'd most liken it to a cryogenic chamber that you see in any space exploration film where they freeze them up for however many years. That's the closest thing that I could say that we probably all understand what it looks like. It's a cylinder, and it's about the same size as those pods. Average length, or average length, the length is, I think it's just below 3.8 meters for the whole system, or for the whole unit. How much did it cost us? I've mentioned the financial element about this of it earlier on. Pod centers, from the conversations and research we've been having with people who are developing new crematoriums right now, and one of those is indeed an electric crematorium that's being developed. We are roughly, for the same numbers, about the same cost as developing a new crematorium. So financially, it's about there. The system, hopper, which is the thing that holds all of the RTM product, if you will, that will need to be serviced about every 12 months. The centers have been designed and costed to include 2 hoppers, and so you'll never need to stop operations. You just move from one hopper to the next. The hopper the system does have a byproducts, but magically, the byproduct from the service and from the system has its own wonderful properties. And with early growth studies suggested that we've done, and these are ongoing, and there'll be a far more greater emphasis on the growth studies as our final stage of research, is that any tree or plant grown from the byproducts of the system grows up to 20% and sequesters up to 20% more CO2 than a standard tree planted, exactly the same tree planted in standard way. You'll sequester in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 20% more CO2 from that plant. This isn't proven yet, so must state that isn't proven yet, but this is what the early indication of the growth studies is showing us, and obviously that is quite mind-blowing. I'll be honest, I did need to have that explained to me at least 3 times by Professor Carter to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding what I was being told, because it sounded too good to be true, but that indeed is. And all of the final phase of research is going to be published, and it will be open for peer review, so it'll be a scientifically published paper. The final phase, we're going to webcast, we are going to live stream, we're going to invite as many people who want to come and see what we're doing to come and see what we're doing. And this is to hopefully, one, dispel any myths or illusions that might be around it, and also see what the baseline standard for an operation like this should be, because that's incredibly important. The activity at the moment is, and Julie will correct me on my terminology here, I think it's unlawful, therefore unregulated, or unregulated, therefore unlawful. I'm not sure which one it was. Same way that cremation operated for the first 32 years, cremation as a sector operated in exactly the same way for the first 32 years before it became regulated. So what we want to do, and it only became regulated once enough people were doing it and then a standard was set, what we want to do is put that standard in place and get those regulations in place. And so it just protects the science behind this, because it could quite easily be hijacked by loons, for want of a better word, and to make sure that it maintains public confidence, because it's essential that the public maintain their confidence in the process. So, as with all research and development of new technology, the biggest threat to everything is underfunding, and we are no different. Obviously, the more money you put into research and development at this stage, the quicker you get there, and the better your results and the better your data. We've self-funded the entire project from the very beginning up until now, and we are very much going to be moving into self-funding with the 3rd phase. This does limit us on what we can do. We're already many zeros into this, and so this is the next stage is the most expensive of all. So we are limited. We would like to probably triple the size of this final 3rd phase of testing, but unfortunately budgets as they are, and we have to work within our budgets obviously to make sure that the project gets seen through. We've had little or no interest from governmental powers that be, which is quite interesting, considering that 75% of the local authorities have declared a climate emergency. The government's commitments to net zero, unfortunately there appears to be very little assistance for essential innovation that is required to achieve that net zero gain. So relatively small sums are granted to projects like ours, and they yield the biggest results and value to the taxpayer as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to go off on a little rant here, but Nottingham Council, where we're based, they've committed £50 million recently to a new electric bus system. All very good, but as we've discussed, you've got to plug them in. If the energy is coming from diesel generators, then where's the saving? But obviously the voters will love it. They've not long finished, and they're just about to start expanding their £200 million tram system. And last year they lost £30 million, in a failed Robin Hood energy scheme. Sorry if anyone is from Nottingham Council listening in. Well, that's £280 million. We need 1% of that budget, and we could have this. We could triple the size of the research project that we're doing at Reading University. But we've got to self-fund it because they're spending it all on pointless buses and failed energy schemes. Obviously, like I've just said, the bigger the budget we have, the better the research can be. It's incredibly upsetting to have to put the shackles on people like Professor Tibbett and Professor Carter because of financial constraints, but that's just the way the world is at the moment. But either way, we will have a market-ready product in 18 months. It will mean that we will have to continue R&D afterwards, but that's fine. We've got no issue with that. And we'll be working. We already have local authority interest from 3 local authorities who are interested in having a pod centre in their LA, and conversations are ongoing. So yeah, I look forward to hearing your questions and any feedback you guys might have. Thanks very much. Cheers.
That's brilliant, Simon. Thank you very much indeed. I'll tell you, that's a genuine innovation, and very, very interesting. And congratulations to you and the team on where you've got to with that. Like you say, in so many ways, that is of its time and overdue. And I think you mentioned you've got 3 interesting leads there. I'd be gobsmacked if that didn't run into the hundreds as you start spreading your word and your message and your vision. So well done for everything you guys have done today. It sounds very, very good indeed. Julie, anything from yourself before we start getting into some of the questions?
Only to echo what you've just said, Neil. I think, it's so refreshing to have such an innovative approach, and I think I really liked your sort of back to basics approach, if you like. So if we were designing something brand new, what do we want? We want this. We want low energy input. We want ethical standards. We want all those things. So I think that was a really good approach. I think there are a few questions, but then I might have a few after if they're not the ones that I think there might be. So I'll let Simon answer those and then maybe come back if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Julie, no problem at all. Well, Simon, there's a couple in, we've got one in the chat. We'll start with that. So that's from Brent Stevenson. Hello to Brent. I'll break this down into sections. So first off, Simon, will the pods need to be kept inside a building, or they can be kept outside? You described how they look a little bit, but if you can embellish that a little bit more for us.
Yeah, they will need to be housed. They can be outside, but for the numbers, for quantity of, to be able to work with the numbers of cremation, so to be able to match cremation, if you will, for numbers, they need to be housed. There's a drive system involved in that, so housing them is the best way to do that. Yeah. Okay,
cool, thank you. And Brent goes on, you did talk around them being 3.6 meters in length and so on, but so Brent asked about space to do this, but I think the crux of the question there is, if you're replacing a cremator or a crematorium that, running 1,000 cremations, how many pods would you need to do that, or what would the implications be for your space?
So they would need their own. So they would need their own space. The space isn't huge amounts. I don't actually have it at hand at the moment, but I can happily send that on to Brent, because we've actually put a design together for a local authority who wanted a certain amount. With each pod doing a minimum of 4 dispersals per year, and so it's just basically times it up by 4. So you'd need 250 pods for 1,000 dispersals per year, and multiply it up that way.
Okay, cool. And then you'd already mentioned, I think earlier on, you'd said that, that you drawn the comparison with the modern day cremator going. I think it was an electric example, and you said, give or take the specifics of the build and so on. It's pretty much a like for like cost or thereabouts.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's not far off. Now, obviously, there's huge variables when you're costing things like this out, as in what part of the country you're in. Just land costs, things like that. But from what and obviously my exposure to, and people are sometimes a little bit reticent to let us know how much things have cost when we're trying to find these things out. But from the incredibly helpful and useful folks that I spoke to, they have confirmed that we are running about the same sort of cost level as developing a new crematorium.
Very good. And I suppose the next part from Brent here, in terms of once you've the initial outlay and so on, the ongoing costs. I know you mentioned there that the forgive me if I've got the language totally right, but the cultures, the solution, you help me out. the material that's inside the pods, that would need to be replaced. I think you said roughly every 12 months. But are there any other ongoing maintenance costs, upkeep costs, and so on?
No more than you'd expect. Well, it will actually be cheaper to operate than a crematorium. Your staffing levels are going to be less for a start, because the system's automated. A crematorium, obviously, it's constant because of the time it takes for a cremation. 1.5 to 2 hours. Your time, you need the staff constantly there, whereas with this system, you don't really need that. So your staffing levels are a lot less than your standard crematorium. You also don't have the grounds to maintain and such things like that. But the average cost per transition is about £300 is what it will cost the centre. But the price point on the transitions themselves, or each transition, each dispersal in the pod, will be cheaper than the average cost of burial, but more expensive than cremation at the start. And that's purely due to just a scale of economy. The more pods there are, and the more that's operating, these costs probably will be able to be dropped. But at the moment, it will run for the general Joe public. It will run cheaper than a standard burial, but it'll be a little bit more expensive than your standard cremation.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. We've another one from Ken West. Where do the activators come from, and how much soil remains in cubic yards or meters, or whatever measure you can give?
So the activators are all naturally occurring, so they're found everywhere. The reason why decomposition and certainly the keratin and stuff like that's difficult is because it's such a specialist type of bacteria, and there's an enzyme as well that acts on those, that it's incredibly, they're not numerous. And so in nature, there isn't a lot of hair and keratin around to be. And so what we do by culturing it, all you do is encourage the development of those, a bit like letting your milk go off, it becomes a culture. They're all very naturally occurring. Like I say, we don't bioengineer anything. All we do is isolate them, and then we encourage them. So in answer to Ken's question, that we mine them naturally, basically. I mean, they're everywhere. So it's a little bit like, I suppose, like a yeast. In sourdough, why your bread goes moldy, it's because the yeast's in the air and stuff like that. These things are around us everywhere. You just need them in certain quantities to become effective, which is why decomposition can take a long time, because if you don't have them in the right numbers and their conditions aren't correct for them to multiply up to be effective, have enough numbers to be effective, to have enough count to be effective. So what we do is ensure that we develop the counts up naturally. It's a natural process. So we develop them off natural organic materials.
Okay. So good for the environment then, not just from a point of view, whereas we're not burning fossil fuels, but also that no chemicals used, and anything to dispose of in hazardous materials, anything like that.
Nothing is 100% natural. Everything involved is 100% organic. But by organic, I mean as in the scientific term, not the vegetable marketing term, or soil association or whatever. But yeah, so everything involved is completely organic. As for what do the family get back? The family get back, it's a little bit more. It's in cremation, like say your ashes come back, they're 3.5 kilo, you get back about 6 kilo. Okay. And let's say what you receive back is completely safe. There's no contamination to it, so it doesn't contain any nasties. Because of the way the pod operates, certain parts of decomposition create a lot of heat, especially when it's controlled as we control it. That heat sterilizes the whole environment. So it will sterilize itself, if you will. So things like your salmonellas and all this sort of thing completely sterilized before anything gets sent back to the family. Obviously, it's checked and then it's signed off safe and goes on for the on-site lab.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And then just one from me, if you may. You'd mentioned at the start, I think part of your company or a sister company, forgive me, quite what the specifics was, but an American operation. Are they at the same stage you are in terms of the R&D, or is it you're in kind of lockstep with them, or is
exactly that. It's a partnership. We work with them. But if you like, in business terms, we are very tightly entwined.
Okay. Yeah. And just out of interest, did the amazing, like you say, that what the local authorities have declared in terms of the emergency regarding the climate and so on, and the number of those, and all the pressure for us to become operate more viably, but very little interest in terms of the innovation from central government. Why do you think that is? And then is that being mirrored in the States, or is there any more kind of uptake of this there, early uptake or not?
I'd say it's even harder for them in the States. This is why we're carrying the research out in the UK. This is why the final phase has been done. Well, there's a couple of reasons why the final phase has been done in the UK. Firstly, the UK has a gold standard. If you achieve in the UK a regulatory standard, it's generally accepted anywhere else because of just how we do things here. And we love some rules and regs and regulations, don't we? And so yeah, I'd say in the States, facing the more, they're about 10 years behind everything environmental. I think in the UK, we are a much smaller landmass. We don't have the space, where in the States, it's fine. We'll just go over there, sort of thing. Obviously, it's a huge place. So yeah, but the challenges wise, I think there's more in the States than what we've got over here, just by public perception. You know, there's nothing like an electric car movement. There isn't the same environmental, you know, energy, if you will, in the States as to what there is over here. And as for the lack of governmental assistance, I don't know. We just can't even get through the door, to be perfectly honest. There doesn't seem to be, it's not that we're missing the mark, it just doesn't seem to be the place to send your focus to and say, hey, how you doing? There is all sorts of grant systems, there are all sorts of grant schemes, but we're chucked in the same category as, say, a factory that's developing a new way of canning baked beans that uses electric motors to do that. So we're in the same sort of category. If you ask me, you know, honestly, I'd probably be quite cynical about it as to why that is, but it's probably not the place to air those views at the moment.
No worries. Julie, anything from you? Yeah.
Simon, yeah, you know, really interesting process, and I can see it could be an alternative to burial and cremation certainly in the early days. For some people, I don't think it's going to replace cremation overnight. It's taken cremation best part of 100 and odd years to become the most popular form of disposal, but you know, I think people will stick with that for some time to come. Have you done any kind of research on the public's perception of the process?
Not as of yet. I had an incredibly interesting conversation with Professor Douglas Davies and one of his PhD students, Georgina, last week. And this is something that we are going to look into more. But again, at the moment, we need to get the science right. And so we know what it is that we're asking the public, which we're pretty much there. Hence the reason why we're having these conversations now with your good selves and stuff, because we think we're there. But this is definitely on the agenda. Just from our own experience with our sister company, one of our other companies, the Woodland Burial Company, we were told by individuals within the funeral sector, what a terrible idea, it'll never work, the public won't do it, they won't go for it, they want a chapel, they want it. We found that to be the exact opposite. You know, we're busier than we've ever been. Obviously, I mean, we're talking now, not just in pandemic, during the pandemic. We're busier than we've ever been, and the feedback we get from the clients that we deal with there, with that company, is that they're desperate for an alternative. They don't want to go to the creme. They don't want to go to the cemetery. They want something different, and just by offering something that's just a slightly different take on a traditional service, it's proving to be insanely popular. And again, with our living memorial products, which are basically the RTN that acts upon the ashes. So there's two products, one that acts on bodies, one that acts on the ashes, slightly different calibrations. Just by the way that's been received by the public, there's definitely a hunger. And just going back to your comment about the 100 years for cremation, now there's a reason to change, and that's the difference. There's a reason, whereas before it was just something different. It's cremation over burial. Big step. I think the public now are far more educated, aware of the environmental issues, and are actively going out and seeking alternatives for themselves. So I think it's a slightly different, if you like, a social environment now to probably what it was 100 years ago, and people's thinking, education, people are a lot more educated. And like I say, people now understand the reason for the change and the alternative. And to be fair, we've looked at it, and 4 to 5% of the market will make quite a huge change anyway. So it doesn't need to be this mad rush. We don't think that it's going to replace cremation like this overnight, but what it will do is it needs to begin, so it can start at least helping the people who want that alternative, who've lived their entire lives, environmentally friendly, environmentally conscious, the people who return their milk bottle tops and things like this. When they comes to end of life, they've still only got these two options, which neither of them fit into how they've lived their entire life. So I think personally, the upband from, like say, from the work we've done with the Woodland Burial Company, I think that the acceptance will be fine for the levels we need. 5% of of the market would be, you know, groundbreaking for us. So we're not thinking overnight we're going to just 5% of the market would be absolutely groundbreaking.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the way it probably go, isn't it? Slow start. Appeal to a particular kind of market, and then over time that will change, I guess. But when in your woodland burial sites, do you use RTN as part of the burial?
Absolutely, it's part of our license condition with North East Derbyshire Council.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And do people understand that when they choose?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the amount we explain it to our client and to the families is I thought it would be a little bit too much to hear, if you know what I mean. But the staff, you know, have come back. So our funeral angel Becky has requested more information. Actually wants a training day so she can give more information, because the basics that we've told, obviously not working for a different company, she's not had the full spiel, if you will. But she wants more information because the families are asking her for more information. So yeah, I think it's definitely and again, the people who are coming to a woodland burial site, you've not been, have you, Julie? No, we need to change that.
Not yet.
We need to change that. Yeah, the people who are coming, they obviously want a certain thing anyway when they're coming, and so they're already in a certain mindset. But like I say, the number of people that is quite staggering. I mean, it's taken us by surprise. It's certainly taken Chesterfield and District Local Authority and also North East Derbyshire Local Authority by surprise. How popular it's been.
You see, I wonder if there's a broader application for the RTN in traditional burial. You know, I'm just working on a paper about reuse of graves, where, you know, there's got to be sort of ethical considerations, and we don't want to be reusing graves where there's still remains. You know, we want remains to be entirely skeletal or ideally gone altogether. You know, I can see that, you know, for the cemetery of the future, it would be really useful to have something like that, so that we know that when we come to reuse graves after X number of years, we're not going to encounter human remains.
Yeah, I mean, we've been using it ever since day one. Like I say, it was conditioned, so all of our burials take place using the product. And again, it's all it is reintroducing or introducing what should be on the surface, if you like, in finer numbers, into depth at the depth of burial. So yeah, and Professor Carter, when he came to visit the burial site, 2019, I think it was, he came over, and he was amazed. Just by, so a normal burial, a normal grave, life will repel away from that site for X amount of time, and then it will take a long time for, you know, mosses, grasses, these sort of things to come back to the gravesite. Whereas the graves we have mossed over completely within 12 months. We have bluebells growing out the top of graves. We have all sorts, you know, it's just a very obvious when you look at it as well. So we've been up and had a look at a few different sites just to compare, and you can see it does actually bring, so it attracts, so rather than repel, you know, life, if you will, it actually brings it encourages it. Interesting.
I think I struggle very, very slightly from being a former archaeologist and kind of thinking that in the future there might be no bodies to excavate, because, you know, that's a large part of what I did as an archaeologist. But as a crematorium cemetery professional, you know, I find this really rather exciting. So thank you. Just one more, if I may, in case anybody else has got questions. But you mentioned mercury earlier. So how does the product deal with mercury or any other kind of heavy metals and things that come out of the decomposition process?
So the aluminum is, you know, fillings basically with mercury. Is completely inert until it gets vaporized, gets subjected to the high temperatures of cremation. That's when it becomes an issue. Obviously, using fillings in your mouth, it's completely inert, and it's just very much like as you would in cremation, where you take the augmentations out afterwards. Exactly the same sort of process. The other thing is that's a good point, actually, Julie. Cheers. Any augmentations, things like that, as squeamish as it may sound, you can recycle them, you can reuse them. So in cremation, these things get completely, you know, denatured, twisted through the heat, but just through the process. For this process, they'll just be completely stripped out, and they will look exactly as they were. So there's a definite opportunity to be reusing. You could send them to, you know, countries, third world countries, wherever you want to send them. We could use them for a company in the UK for cheaper medical, whatever, but we can basically reuse all of those things if needed, or we can just recycle them as you do in cremation, but they will still be in perfect working order. They won't have altered or changed in any way because they're not subjected to the huge heat and then also the violent effects that heat has.
Okay. Right, I did say one last question, but I've got another one now. The residue, the 6 kg of material, is it soil? Is it?
Yeah. So like
and sorry, I was going to say, is there any DNA in there, or is that completely gone?
Completely gone. But we do take a DNA sample before the process, so there'll be a DNA bank, and so we'll be able to have a DNA record of everybody that's been through the system, and that will be stored on the system. So basically, we'll be able to prove who was who before they went in.
Okay.
And then keep a record of that. And obviously DNA, very, very small sample. But yeah, there's no DNA, which funny enough, Dr. Haskell, who has the body farm in Illinois, he's a crazy guy. One of the things was the FBI were interested and were like, whoa, what are you doing here, guys? Because with the body farm, a lot of the work is done in forensic sciences and law enforcement. And yeah, one of the issues was, whoa, hang on, you're just going to completely naturally get rid of everything. That could cause those issues. But then we explained you can buy lime from B&Q or Home Base or wherever, so it makes no odds.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Indeed, and related to that, Sue Young has a question there, and just to clarify, you did say that bones are decomposed as part of that process, aren't they?
Everything, absolutely everything. So it would just be like opening a bag of topsoil when you're done. That's exactly what it looks like.
Very good, very good. Okay, well, look, brilliant. I can, as with all new innovations, how you bring it to market, how you package it up, all of that, tons to work out. The implementation, the physicality, the transition from old to new, all of those things aside, I'd be absolutely gobsmacked. I get really behind the research that you have and the consumer sentiment to be, that the natural decomposition. I think you're going to really hit a sweet spot there with a certain portion of the market. So I'd imagine, practicalities aside, as you figure it all out, that there'll be huge interest. Personal opinion, I think.
Yeah, the actual operational system is already. I didn't talk about that too much because it's not really the interesting bit. The interesting bit is how it happens. Yeah, all of the operational, how we move the pods around, how we load the bodies into them, how we clean the pod out, how we do all of that. That's all worked out already and practiced and well versed. But it's just not very interesting to talk about.
But equally important for the folks listening, the folks on the ground to know. So thank you for clarifying. And yeah, I'm sure that's all good. We've got the cat back.
Wait, I was going to say, will you be doing cats?
Yeah, we can do.
Brilliant.
Right. Simon, any final thoughts to round off on?
No, just if anyone would like any more information, please don't hesitate to get in contact. And that'd be, as Julie will testify, I can talk the hind legs off a donkey when I get going. So yeah, if there's any more information required or anyone wants any specific detail, then please, yeah, don't hesitate to get in contact.
Or if anyone's got any money to donate to your research project.
Oh my word, yeah, that would be lovely. yeah. Any benevolent people out there? Yeah, I'd love it.
If there was a local authority that was particularly interested, that would be great, wouldn't it? I think.
Yeah. I mean, as it got pointed out to me the other day, I can only sell my house once, which is unfortunate.
Oh dear.
Stuff. All right. Well, at the risk of scaring the audience away as we start going around asking for money, we will conclude there. And Simon, it's been great having you. Thank you very much, and honestly, genuinely very interesting. And Julie, of course, again, another great session. So thank you both.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a good week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a fortnight.
Cheers. Take care.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.